Like and follow if you love horror. There was a sense of disappointment as 8 men turned to face Joan. Joan took a deep breath in. In her gun lay 6 rounds. Joan was out of flares, out of bear mace, and out of options. She aimed down the dark tunnel and fanned the hammer of her Colt. 0 effect. The 2 hands began to slowly drag Dustin towards the opening. He whimpered. The 8 men looked at Joan curiously. Hi there. Sorry about that. Don't suppose we could call this one a do-over? Joan said, palming the cylinder of her gun. She fumbled for more rounds. Fumbled. Joan never fumbled. They all looked at each other, genuinely seeming to be confused as Joan began to reload. This was a false break in Joan's luck, however. Seconds before she could even thumb in the first round, they fell upon her. As they pressed her to the floor, she could see Dustin. Inch by inch, he was taken into the tunnel. Finally, a hand clasped itself over Dustin's head and pulled him in completely. For a moment, all she could hear was his whimpering, then silence. Samuel wants this one. Get her limbs, one of the greasers said. Joan knew where this was going. Within moments, they dragged her back up the stairs, pulled her into the church. There, 2 held her while the rest left to get Samuel. Samuel never came. Suddenly, a commotion broke out. Finally, there was an explosion nearby, then a second which tore through the church. Joan and her guards were sent sprawling. She immediately picked herself up and made a beeline straight for the front door. Only 2 went off. That would have to do. Outside, all around, cultists scrambled amongst the chaos to deal with the fires. The main estate was missing a sizable chunk and was already partially engulfed in flames. The church had a hole blown right in the side of it and the rectory. Out front was the line of cars from before, a few even still running. Joan jumped right into Samuel's lead car and peeled off. Amateurs was an understatement. They didn't just lean on their power, they made outright cocky mistakes because they overestimated their power. But Joan hadn't seen it in time. Dustin was gone. As she flew back down the road in her pilfered new Continental, in the rear view she saw something emerge from the church. It burst out, bringing with it a trail of fire that plumed into the sky, emitting a bone-chilling howl. The twins. When Joan arrived in Minneapolis, she was half worried that it would be to turn herself in. Regardless, there was no report of what her or Dustin had been up to the 2 nights prior. Not even an APB from the cop barracks that Samuel had taken over. She sat before her friend and close personal colleague and nearly collapsed in on herself. Joan, I trust you like I trust my sidearm. Sergeant Detective Carol Ambrose began sympathetically. But you've practically just confessed to multiple felonies that we have no indication ever happened. Uni's just reported in from the location of your trailer. There's no trailer, no evidence of a fire. It's just an empty lot. Tell me what I'm supposed to think. What exactly do you expect me to do? Please, Carol, I need you on this. I had that safe house for over a decade. It wouldn't just up and disappear. You've been there. Remember the antique diesel submersible periscope? Joan leaned in close to Carol. Carol leaned heavy on her desk and scratched the back of her head. I don't even know where to start besides reporting it stolen. Fucking spare me, Carol. Joan thumped her hand on Carol's desk lightly, making Carol jump back. You're not some green uniform cop. You know it's been stripped for parts by now and scattered to the winds. She breathed out deeply and tried to compose herself. I'm sorry, but I'm desperate, and I've got no one else. Please. Carol reached across the desk and cupped her hand over Joan's. I gotcha. Great. Got any bear mace? I also need to replace my sidearm. Fucker stole it off of me. She slumped. Got anything in a .357 Magnum? Just handing over 2 military-grade .357 Desert Eagles to Joan was not something Carol was comfortable with, but she knew her friend needed help, and that's all that mattered. If it wasn't for Joan, Carol wouldn't have made it through the academy. Even liberal as it was during her time there, the harassment almost ended Carol. Joan saw her through at the cost of her own graduation and career. Carol owed her. Having nothing else to go on, Carol and Joan focused on Samuel's car. Well, the car isn't reported stolen, Carol said, leaning against the hood of the laptop, against the hood with a laptop. Belongs to an Alistair Finch. No arrest records, not even a ticket. I'll bet good money it's an alias. My detective senses are starting to tingle. Glove compartment's locked. Keys weren't on the ring. I've just about got it open, Joan said, working her picks into the lock. It slowly started to turn. There's something that's bothering me. You said you shot this Samuel guy? Carol looked over. Once you left him for dead at the motel, and once at the mall before the fire. But then you mentioned him again later when you encountered him at the estate. Joan stopped for a moment. He was wearing armor. She shrugged it off. Joan, how long have we known each other? Carol tried to make eye contact. What do you want me to say, Carol? Joan just got back to work. You don't miss, and you don't let a thing like body armor get in your way. First one's to the chest, all the rest are to the head. Carol sat down her laptop and crossed her arms. Got it, Joan said, ignoring Carol. The glove compartment fell open with a clunk. A large, leather-bound book fell out. It looked almost like a family Bible. It was more than just large. It was thick and creaked with stretching leather. It must have barely fit into the glove compartment. There was an emblem on the front that resembled a crucifix, except the T pronged out 4 ways on each side, and each prong again 3 times, linking in a semicircle around the cross. Joan opened it and confronted by the language she couldn't identify. Besides that, there were road maps of the surrounding counties. Most were maps of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Scattered on the maps were simple black X's, but nothing more. Well, that's not fucking helpful, Joan said, looking over to the discovery. I'll need a translator, but first I need to know what fucking language this even's supposed to be. Portuguese, I think, Carol peered over her shoulder. I can't read it, but I recognize a couple of the words. At least I think. Joan nodded. Better than no direction at all. Now we just need a translator, preferably one that can identify this cross. Well, it's religious. It's likely Portuguese. Let's see who's out there and might be more familiar with this sort of thing, Carol said, returning to her laptop. She punched in a couple things. Careful who you bring in on this. People are dead, Carol, Joan said, thumbing through the book. The book was filled with the typical religious filigree and symbols. That was broken up every now and then by strange diagrams and what could easily be mistaken for mathematical equations. Then she came to a page with a drawing. She clapped the book closed. She was sure something about this book, something about this book or in this book would explain what was going on. The sudden noise of Joan clasping the book shut jolted Carol. Jesus, Carol said with a start. It's bad enough you already have my nerves on edge. Carol took her laptop and spun it to face Joan. All right. Well, for the book, I may have just the man for us. Salvatore Alvarenga? Sorry. Salvatore Alvarenga, Biblical Studies major for the local Catholic diocese. He specializes in Portuguese conquering and conversion of South America. I figured he's our best shot. He's also our only shot unless we fly to D.C. So we have a scholar who might be able to help us translate and understand this book. With it, we might be able to understand this cult. If we can understand the cult, maybe we can figure out what their goals are and finally turn this thing around, Joan said, nodding. Carol went back to her laptop. I'm hearing a lot of ifs. It'll be a far stretch to convince a judge to produce a warrant to investigate any activities related to some obscure holy text. But so far, it's almost a solid piece of information you've given me to work with. Wait a minute. What is it? Joan stood up and walked over to see what Carol had discovered. I have some interesting news. One of our local snitches reported he saw what looked like the periscope from a submersible in a chop shop. Carol turned to Joan and smiled. Finally, a goddamn break. Joan cracked her back and then her neck. I constantly have to rely on these idiots making mistakes. Trying to sell this periscope from a diesel submersible has got to be the biggest blunder they've made yet. They probably realized they needed to get rid of it as quickly as possible and just got sloppy. Carol folded up the laptop. Well, grand theft is a felony. Come on, the shop has been under surveillance for a while. This is the break we need